Hi, I'm Senator Tammy Baldwin from the great state of Wisconsin, and I am so glad to be on Ask Me Anything. I just came from one of our Democratic spotlight hearings. We are trying to spotlight what's happening in this big, beautiful betrayal, as we are calling it, um, because our Republican colleagues are not doing so. And this particular spotlight hearing was about how the big, beautiful betrayal uh, benefits the very wealthiest through the tax provisions at the expense of hardworking families. And so we had both tax experts and economists who are talking about what the details of this bill does. And then we had hardworking families talking about how important Medicaid is in their lives, talking about how important nutrition programs are in their lives. And it was just this juxtaposition. And I know that you have lots of questions. And so I am ready to get started. And I have the first one queued up right now. Yvonne asks, she says, I keep hearing about the healthcare cuts, but what does the budget have to do with Medicaid or the Affordable Care Act? And I am so glad you asked that question because the House passed their measure a couple weeks back in, by the way, the middle of the night. So clear they didn't really want you to be focusing in on the details. But when we had a chance to take a deep look at what the House passed, there's deep cuts to Medicaid and to the Affordable Care Act. The estimate, based on the details of the bill, is that about 16 million Americans would lose their health care. The majority of those would be people who would lose their Medicaid benefits. But a substantial number, around over 5 million, would lose their Affordable Care Act plans. So let me tell you a little bit more about each of those. The Affordable Care Act has been made affordable, especially during the pandemic and as we emerge from the pandemic, because Congress passed tax credits that made people's insurance premiums affordable, really, really affordable. And so we had millions of Americans who signed up and had health care, some of them for the first time, because they could afford their premiums. When you have health care, you're much more likely to get preventative care for your family. And if you have a chronic condition and you have health insurance, you're much more likely to keep up with your doctor's appointments and keep in as good a health as you can. And when you lose that health insurance, the likelihood of chronic conditions getting worse and having to go to emergency rooms, that just increases. And I'm going to say a bit about the Medicaid cuts, but then maybe a little bit about what in combination those things make happen. So Medicaid, the reason people are going to lose Medicaid is in part because of something called work reporting requirements. Now, in order to be eligible for Medicaid, you have to fill out all this paperwork and prove that you are financially eligible for Medicaid or that you qualify for one of the Medicaid waiver programs. And by the way, just depending on where you live in the country, you may not hear it as Medicaid. I'm from Wisconsin. We call it Badger Care. And different states have different names for their program. But so you have to file all this cumbersome work and paperwork in order to qualify. Most people on Medicaid work, but these work reporting requirements, which would be probably far more stringent, far more frequent, are totally aimed at making people who are duly eligible for Medicaid get kicked off. And we've seen that happen in a couple of states that have piloted work reporting requirements. They want to scale that up nationwide. And the last thing I want to say about this, and I said I'd come back to it, the combination of people losing their health insurance through the Affordable Care Act and people losing their health insurance coverage through Medicaid is that these programs also impact our economy. There are people who have jobs as home care aides or nursing home nurses' aides, or people who work in rural critical access hospitals whose part of their salaries are paid for by Medicaid. and private insurance. And when these programs go away, so do their jobs, and so do these hospitals, and so do these places where our seniors get their care. It has huge consequences. Okay, so next question comes from Sam on TikTok. It says, does the bill cut or expand the deficit? Everyone is saying different things. Oh boy, do I hear you. Yes, facts are facts, but some people try to put it in a light that persuades people that they have the right view. Just this week, we have a new estimate of what the bill would do to the deficit. This is from OMB, from CBO, the Congressional Budget Office. And this says what it will do to the deficit and the debt over a 10-year period. And the new prediction is that it will add $3.4 trillion to the national debt. This is just enormous. And when you're talking about numbers with so many zeros after them, sometimes it's hard to really understand what that means. Now, I could get in the weeds. I'm not going to right now, but there are folks who are playing tricks with the numbers. They're using different accounting rules and different accounting assumptions. But those are just funny math. The bottom line is that if we pass the House passed bill as it is, it would add about $3.4 trillion to our national debt over the next decade. There are some colleagues who I have who are saying, I'm not going to vote for this bill unless it's fully paid for, meaning they want more cuts, more devastating cuts to our most vulnerable. And I have other colleagues who are looking at this bill going, this already goes too far. But we have got to make it crystal clear what the real impacts are. And just to be clear again, they're cutting programs for our most vulnerable working families to give these big tax cuts that disproportionately benefit the very wealthy. That's Robin Hood in reverse. All right, Ted on X asks, why do Republicans want to take away my Medicaid? All right, so I can't get into their heads, but I can tell you what some of them have been saying. I have a lot of Republican colleagues who insist we don't want to take away anything from anyone who deserves it, but we do want to go after waste, fraud, and abuse. Well, I can tell you that taking away Medicaid from somebody who is eligible for the program is not going after fraud, waste, and abuse. The cuts that they've been proposing in Medicaid and nutrition assistance programs are literally taking the programs away from folks who are eligible and who need them. So when my Republicans say they are just fighting fraud, waste, and abuse, that's disingenuous. They can't even point to one of their cuts that actually eradicates fraud or waste or abuse. And I'm not saying that there isn't any fraud, but a lot of what does happen is from folks who are not on Medicaid, folks who are trying to bilk the system. And so we should go after them, but that's not what the details of this bill would do. Okay, it looks like we have a question coming via a video submission. So let's play the video.
Hi, I'm Sari Beth Rosenberg. I'm a New York City public school teacher, and I wanted to know what's the best way to empower everyone around pushing back against this bill and finding a way to make sure it doesn't get passed through. Because I know a lot of people are feeling motivated by the No Kings protests, but now want to figure out where to put their energy to prevent this big, ugly bill from getting passed through. Thank you so much for your time.
So I love that you are a New York public school teacher, because a lot of what we're talking about doing right now has to do with educating, educating the public so that they can educate my Republican colleagues who want to push this thing through. So part of it is lifting up stories. If you're a public school teacher, you know the power of storytelling. That's how we engage some of our youngest children. It's also how we engage some of our most powerful people who serve in the Congress, in the Senate. Because it is much harder to look a constituent in the eye who has just told you that they rely on Medicaid for care and services for a child with a disability, or that they are being kicked off nutrition assistance, and how it will impact their family. Listening to somebody who runs a food bank who says, if the need grows in my community, I don't know how my food pantry or food bank can keep up. These are powerful stories that we can tell, and then use social media like these opportunities to uplift these stories. You know, there's several ways you can fight back and make sure that my Republican colleagues know exactly what you want them to do. Vote no on this big ugly bill. Now, the simplest ways are just call. And don't just call one person, call both of your senators and your House member. Call your state representatives, because a lot of cuts at the federal level will trickle down and create a much greater burden on our states that some may be ill-equipped to tackle. So that's one way, call. I'm going to give you my own example. I've been in the Senate for a while, and last year at this time, my office averaged somewhere between 50 and 100 phone calls a day. These days, I'm regularly receiving 10 times that, between 500 and 1,000 calls per day from people who are watching this, learning about it, and saying, please oppose this bill. So calling is really important. You can also email, and you can also go to your members' websites. I have a part of my website where you can actually lift up your story. And so I can't think of anyone better than a teacher to get the word out that we need to educate our elected officials, lift up stories, and speak out. I want to make sure that you're continuing to drop any of your questions for all of us in the chat. And next up, I am so happy to welcome my colleague, Senator Dick Durbin.
Looks like I have a next question from Josie from YouTube. And Josie writes, we're reading about all of this on the news, but you're there every day. Can you tell us what makes you personally the most angry about this bill? I think it's hard to find one single thing that I hate the most, but it's got to be the fact that 16 million Americans would lose their health insurance. And this is kind of personal to me. My wife and I got married in my first year in law school here in Washington, and God sent us a beautiful little girl a year later, and she had some serious birth problems. In fact, there was a question whether she could survive. We took her to the local hospital, and Children's Hospital in Washington, D.C., and I was worried because I didn't have any health insurance. And if you're a father of a baby with a serious medical issue and you have no health insurance, you've never felt more helpless. I certainly never have. And it really is something that stuck with me my whole life. And if somebody decides that they want to give a tax break to the wealthiest people and pay for it by eliminating health insurance for 16 million Americans, those are fighting words as far as I'm concerned. I am so proud of the Affordable Care Act under President Obama. And I think the fact that we extended health insurance to more Americans than ever in our history is something I'll remember forever. Next question is from Bernadette on Instagram. Can you explain why the work requirements for Medicaid in this budget bill are a bad thing? I always assumed work requirements were a good thing. Well, they are a good thing for people who are not in an extraordinary circumstance. For example, if you happen to be working but not making much money and you qualify for a SNAP program, the food stamp program, it'll give you a supplement if you qualify, give you a supplement of $6 a day for each individual. That's not a lot of money, but it helps to make ends meet. Now, if you're a person who is not working for a variety of reasons, let's say you have a young child at home, or you're a caregiver for an aging parent, those two examples that come to mind, you might not meet a work requirement, but you might need some more food on the table. The states that have had these work requirements, turns out they are a bigger burden than you think. I just looked at the form in my state of Illinois to prove that you're working to qualify for the $6 a day for food stamps. The form is 19 pages long. It looks like an income tax return. It's pretty complicated. And it isn't just a matter of filing it once and being done with it. You could face the need to refile it every month or two, depending on what your state decided was a work requirement. So I would say that people working, good thing, but let's be honest. A lot of people in lower income categories are working and not making, and putting this burden on them, administrative burden, may be too much. Dominic's on YouTube. He says, what are Democrats doing to stop the big ugly bill? Dominic, we're talking to you and millions of other Americans and saying, mention this to your friends. Let them know there's a big decision being made in Washington. The budget bill, this is basically a budget bill, it is the priorities and values of a government. And we see the priorities of the Trump government. What they want to do is to cut basic programs like Medicaid, Medicare, and food stamps, and SNAP plan, and in order to give tax breaks to the wealthiest people. So do you know what those tax breaks turn out to be? If you're in the top 0.1% of wage earners in America, you're doing really, really well. And this Trump plan will give you an annual tax break of $348,000. One person, $348,000. However, if you happen to be down in the minimum income category, the tax break is valued at $20 a month, $240 a year. So $240 for those struggling to get by, $348,000 a year for the richest people. That's how we spread this information and try to stop this big ugly bill. Alejandro on TikTok, why do people keep talking about bird baths? Well, Alejandro, I'll explain that to you. There once was a senator named Robert C. Byrd from the state of West Virginia. He dreamed up this process, this procedural process in the Senate called reconciliation. And he basically said the most serious issues are subject to 60 votes to pass in the Senate. We're going to make an exception. In reconciliation, you can pass a bill with a majority vote as long as you cut spending. It's only to cut spending and to reduce the deficit. So the obvious question, well, who's going to decide that if the bill truly does cut spending and reduce the deficit? A person known as a Senate parliamentarian, a person who's responsible for the rules of the Senate. And how does it work? You end up taking the bill into them and let them review the language and see if it works, if it indeed cuts spending and reduces the deficit. They call that process a bird bath, named after Senator Robert C. Byrd. So that's the process. Next question. Looks like we have a question coming through via video. Oh, good.
There's language in the budget bill that, if passed, would allow the Trump administration to ignore court orders. How is that allowed within the budget reconciliation process? And if it's not allowed, how are y'all going to prevent the Republicans from just jamming it through anyway?
So that was a great question, and it fits right in with the previous question about bird baths. This provision They managed to sneak into the House bill, and most people didn't know it was there. And what it boils down to is this: Trump is tired of losing in court, and he loses again and again and again. Over 90% of the time that his executive orders have been challenged, they've been thrown out by courts, by judges who were appointed by Republicans, judges appointed by Democrats. They've been thrown out. So they decided to put a provision into the law through the House bill that has nothing to do with the budget. And it basically says if you don't file a bond when you end up suing the government to stop some bill from becoming a law that changes things in our government, if you don't file a bond, then it isn't a valid decision. You can't be found in contempt for not living up to the provisions of the court's decision. That basically says if you've got enough money to file a bond to go to court, you can go forward. If you don't, you're out of luck. So they put this into the original House bill. It's a little paragraph in a 1,000-page bill. And we found it. Didn't take long, but we found it. It has nothing to do with the budget and spending. And basically, I think that we can hope that a birdbath with the Senate parliamentarian will throw it out of the bill. If not, it gives an advantage to a president that I think is unfair. Cameron on TikTok asked me, can't Democrats just filibuster to save Medicaid? Well, of course, I wish we could, but that's what I mentioned earlier. Reconciliation, this budget process, is not subject to the filibuster, 60-vote requirement to overcome it. Simple majority works. And right now it's 53-47 with a Republican majority in the Senate. So they have enough votes if their people all stick together to make these changes. And we can't filibuster it because it's reconciliation. Next question. Ben Weiss from Courthouse News on TikTok asked me the following. Can you speak about the contempt of court language Republicans removed from the big, beautiful bill? Well, that's the one I just mentioned. The provision I believe you're referring to that passed in the House. We expect to see it again in the Senate. I don't know if the Republicans will remove it. I hope they do. Wesley on YouTube, will this bill take money from state Medicaid programs? It basically reduces the amount of money going back to the states. We gave a special deal to the states when we passed the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare. We said to them, if you want to expand the coverage of Medicaid, we'll pay you more money from the federal government to do it. 90-10, I believe, was the provision. 90% federal government if you'll do 10% state government. A lot of states took us up on it, red states as well as blue states. So when we reduce the money being spent on Medicaid, it means less money going back to the states. And some states, Illinois is one of them, has an automatic trigger that if there's a cutback in the federal funds that were promised to them, they're not required by law to continue the program with all state funds. In fact, it'd be pretty hard to do, economic hardship. So that this bill would take money from the state Medicaid programs and the expansion of Medicaid will be negated by this possibility. Next question, Tino, does protesting actually help? What can we do? Good question, Tino. I was at Chicago on Saturday at the Daily Plaza. We had a heck of a crowd. I can't tell you exactly how many numbers were in there, but I wouldn't be surprised it wasn't 20,000, maybe 50,000, maybe even more. Does it help? You bet it does. All across the United States, there were televised coverage of these rallies that were taking place. And 99.9% of them were without any incidents of violence or anything you might be embarrassed by. They were just people who were taking time out of their lives because they felt so strongly about the Trump administration and some of the things they're doing, like this reconciliation bill. So I believe it helps. It's not the same as an election, which could change the minority and majority in the Congress, for example, but it also moves us towards a greater national conversation about the issues and perhaps engaging people who weren't involved before. For example, somebody who's benefited, their family's benefited by Medicaid for a grandparent who's in a nursing home. They learn the Republicans are trying to cut back on Medicaid that would help pay for their grandparent in the nursing home. and they think to themselves, well, that's going to create a hardship for my family, and my grandmother or mother happens to be happy where she is. And so the basic challenge for us is to get that message out. And somebody who never maybe even voted or registered to vote before now has an interest in the next election because of their mother or grandmother's care in a nursing home. It's just that simple. Make sure to drop more questions in the chat. And it looks like we have a rare moment here. My colleague from New Jersey, Senator Cory Booker, is going to come up next. You may remember Cory Booker. He had the longest speech in the history of the Senate. It went on for 25 minutes. I'm sorry, for 25 hours. Yes, it's 25 hours, 25 days. No. Are you still going? I was there for the early morning hours and came back, and he was still talking. We just couldn't shut him up. We did. He was great. He inspired us all, and he's inspiring us with this effort as well. So thanks, everybody. Here comes Cory.
All right. Thank you, Dick.
Definitely.
So hello, everybody. I am happy to follow such an extraordinary senator. So let's go. I just want to say at the beginning, this first question from Allie on X is, do you think the CR will pass in its current state? I have to say, I hate that we're in a world where more than a third of Americans don't even know what's going on here, where a third of Americans are not informed about what their government may do to them. And I mean that, to them. Whether you supported Donald Trump or not, this bill is a betrayal of the collective values of our country. So when you say the CR, the continuing resolution, will pass in its current state, I'm not actually sure the Washington speak words, whether the bill that they passed, what he calls this big beautiful bill, will pass, or will we see another CR? What we mean when we say CR here is a continuing resolution. And it's frustrating me that we use these Washington words, that now I see it in a much more cynical way as a way to deceive voters so they don't know really what's going on. So let me define some terms. This continuing resolution that passed last time allows Donald Trump to do whatever the heck he wants when it comes to spending. It is a surrendering of the power of this branch of government to that branch of government against the intentions of our founding fathers. Let me be very specific. The people designed each branch of government with specific roles to play. And so usually continuing resolutions get everybody together, Democrats, Republicans, House and Senate, and agree, we're going to do this just for a short period of time. We're going to just kick the ball down the road. They agree on some other things, and it's done together. This wasn't that. This was the President of the United States telling the Republicans to give me authority until September with no input from the other party so that I can do as I will, so I can behave more like king than president, more like autocrat than what the constitutional framers designed. And we're going to have another big point in September, and this is not on subject because we're looking at the big beautiful bill. But what I want to tell you right now is I'm tired of reacting. I want to respond. The difference is reactions just are instinctual things. Oh crap, that blew up, I'm jumping. I want to respond, knowing that this is another crisis coming, to prepare for it now. Because in September, mark my words, they're going to try to ram another continuing resolution to make Democrats lay down. And if we don't, they're going to say that we're shutting down the government, because they need us to go forward. So I hope somebody clips this and saves this, because I will be saying very loudly right then that it's them that's shutting down the government, them that's perverting the governmental processes, them that's undermining the Constitution, and them that yet again is trying to take us from a democratic republic to an autocracy, to an authoritarian one. All right, next question. Ruth on TikTok. I don't think it could get worse than the House cuts, but isn't the new Senate Republican version even worse? Heck yeah. I didn't think so either. And again, I haven't read through the changes because they're parsing them out to us as they make all these decisions in closed doors, away from the public. They don't want you to see, they don't want you to know. And the drips that have come out already mean that the Medicaid cuts are worse. They're going to be worse for the states. They're going to be worse for hospitals in rural areas and across our country. They're going to be worse for people who need Medicaid to survive. So yes, it is worse. And they're doing other things to put their so-called fingerprints on this. But to me, a lot of it is just making it more difficult and, frankly, violating even what they're saying about the debt, which is going to be into the trillions, about we're not going to touch Medicaid, what they're doing to raise energy costs and more. So yes, it is worse. And again, no surprise here. No surprise here. The question has got to be, what are we going to do? As they get worse, do we get better at fighting them? That's the question. This is Ernie on YouTube. People are getting arrested and disappeared off the streets. It's getting frightening. What are senators doing to stop this? So first of all, is it frightening? Yes. Terrifying to watch masked figures without identification in unmarked vehicles sweep people off of our streets, throw them into vans and drive away with no due process, no day in court, no knowledge of where they're going, and they're often people who have committed no crimes. Many of them have been people that got into our country legally. This is, again, actions more of a Gestapo state, not a constitutional democracy that protects vaunted ideals like due process. But when you say people are getting arrested, let me tell you, it hasn't stopped there. My mayor was arrested. My congresswoman was arrested and indicted on trumped-up charges. I watched another senator get driven to his knees and arrested. We've seen a federal judge arrested. I am telling you, these are warning signs. These are cracks in the dam. Water is spurting through, and we need to be all doing more. So today, Senator Padilla, I was happy, came to the floor, and he said it, just like I think you're implying in your question, that this happened to a senator, but it's happening to so many others, and it is wrong. And so I'm going to speak up, stand up, continue to fight against it, but you have got to too. When the government starts indiscriminately and unjustifiably arresting people, they are trying to silence folks. I'm seeing it all over this Congress. They're silencing businesses by threatening their livelihoods, silencing law firms and who they can represent. I see the fear they're trying to insinuate on college campuses. They are trying to make us afraid. I don't mind fear. It's necessary for courage. But I demand that from myself and from others. We cannot be afraid. We have to speak out. They want to silence us. We've got to speak out when we see what's going on in our country right now. We've got to work together to stop it. So it looks like we have a question coming through via a video submission. I'm grateful for that. Can you let the audio play?
Hello, Senator. My name is Isaac Lima, and about 4 years ago, I suffered a C4 spinal cord injury. And ever since then, I have been reliant on Medicaid to help with my wheelchair, my medicine, my therapies, and much more. Now, one question I want to ask you is, what are the steps that you're taking to help Medicaid and to protect and support Medicaid?
Isaac, first of all, it was an honor to meet you in my office, and I want to thank you for your courage, for you stepping up, for you coming to the Capitol and demanding that people look you in the eye and answer that question. I am going to do everything I can to stop this despicable bill that Donald Trump calls big, beautiful. It is an attack on the healthcare of millions and millions of Americans. In fact, it's going to affect more people than it just affects directly, like you. It's going to affect our hospitals. We've already seen independent, nonpartisan groups say that hospitals all across this country will close. It's going to drive up premium costs for all of Americans because of their attacks on Medicaid and their attacks on the Affordable Care Act. This is a crisis, and we're going to do everything we can to stop it. But just like we did in 2017, It's going to take more than just Democrats standing up and fighting. We've got to convince at least 4 Republicans in the Senate or 4 Republicans in the House. And that's why your voice, my voice, our work, our marching, our protesting, our demanding, which worked back in 2017, has got to work right now. But my biggest frustration is, and I was just talking with a group of senators in it, is this time, back in 2017, there were thousands of more people coming out. And I asked a more senior senator, why aren't we seeing that? And why aren't we seeing more hospital systems come and more medical leaders come and more businesses that rely on Medicaid? And they said because of fear. Because what they fear their businesses will be targeted. They fear their hospitals will be targeted. The way Donald Trump is running right now is he's bullying people. He's showing you that I can rip back your grants, I can take back your federal dollars, I can affect your bottom line. Therefore, you better not show dissent. Because to him, dissent is disloyalty. To him, protest is un-American. But we have to show him what America's about. There's too much at stake for leaders like you, for people who rely on Medicaid, for children with disabilities, for our elders. There's too much at stake. We cannot let Donald Trump win. We have to keep fighting. Please keep dropping questions in the chat. Please keep letting us hear from you. Please keep posting this content. Please keep sharing this content. Please be someone like Paul Revere, waking other people up to the threat that's coming. We need you. It is game time right now. We are days away from them trying to pass this through the United States Senate and kick it back to the House. I'm going to do everything I can with you to stop it here. And if somehow it passes, then we've got to stop it down at the House. This is truly a time of imminent danger for tens of millions of Americans who are facing their cutting and gutting of programs that they rely on to give tax cuts to the uber wealthy in our country, all while still racking up the biggest deficits in American history. This is unacceptable, but we have the power to stop them if we fight, if we fight, if we fight. Please join us in this fight. Take action today by posting, by lifting up your voice, by letting others know what's happening and activating other people to join you and me in this fight. Look, up next we have a dear friend of mine, one of the most respected senators in America. He's actually one of the leaders of one of our most important committees on national security. It's our intelligence committee. But I will tell you right now, he's a Virginian at heart. And Virginia, you know this, has quite the history going back to the Revolutionary War fighters. And I'm happy that he's been in that tradition. He's been a governor. He's now a senator. He is my friend. He's actually like a big brother to me, although he doesn't take me out to dinner enough. Mark, come over here, man. That was your cue when I start ragging on you like that. Big brother's supposed to take care of the little brothers. I don't know. He's been out too busy fighting that he hasn't had time to, buy me some hummus.
Thank you.
Thank you, brother.
Well, hey, everybody. That was my dear friend and ever shy and retiring Cory Booker. I mean, Cory, one thing you got to know, not only did the whole country applaud when he stood for 25 hours to bring us out of the kind of humdrum, and he really touched the nerve of all of us in the nation, and particularly those of us who are his friends and work with him. But he's also really been the person, and I say this as a former technology guy. I was involved in the cell phone business. I was blessed to do well. But Cory Booker is the person who has educated the Democrats in the United States Senate to realize that the way people communicate in America today is not on old-fashioned TV or even newspapers, but it is online. And I want to echo what Cory has said. If we are making content that resonates with you, you got to repost it. This is really a call to arms. So let me go to one of my first questions. Amos on TikTok has said, can someone explain how the new budget bill affects Medicaid funding at the state level? Great question. Medicaid, and listen, I was a former governor. Medicaid is a combination state-federal responsibility. Depending on the state, feds pick up roughly 50%, a little bit more in some of the poorer states. And candidly, the states that have many of our more rural states, they depend on Medicaid the most. They are the most red So the fact that Donald Trump has put this bill out there that's going to literally take 16 million Americans, kick them off of health care in states that voted for him, doesn't make any sense. And in many ways, I mean, as for somebody who was here during the battle around Obamacare, Obamacare was not perfect by any means, but Obamacare dramatically expanded the number of people who got health care coverage in America. This big, ugly, cruel bill, if it passes, we're going to go back, in a sense, in America pre-Obamacare days. And what it'll also do in terms of states, well, in a state like mine, in Virginia, the legislature was still pretty split. It was one of the later states to expand Medicaid coverage. And oftentimes, the legislature, even though we had a Democratic one, we had at the time, we had a Republican in one house, they said, well, we want to make sure the feds keep their commitment on paying their share. And if we suddenly take away the federal money, this is going to add huge hundreds of millions of dollars in almost any state to their state expenses. And the fact is, it's not like people are not going to get sick. They're going to show up back at the emergency room in uncompensated care. And the way most state budgets work, that uncompensated care that comes out of our hospital systems usually ends up back on the state legislatures and the governor's responsibility to cover it. So this is a nightmare for states. Let me just add one other thing on the states. We've talked a lot about Medicaid. What this crowd is also doing in terms of food assistance and school lunches, school breakfasts, a lot of these are on the program that's called SNAP. One of the things that's gotten virtually no attention at all is even in beyond the food assistance cuts. In Virginia, 200,000 folks are going to lose food assistance. But that is also a program that's state and federal. And they have cooked the books and put off most of the administrative costs beyond even the cuts back on the state's back. So in my state, in the Commonwealth of Virginia, just on the food assistance cuts, it's going to add $300 million a year, each and every year, to the state budget woes. That's not fair. It's not right. It's damn right cruel. So Carrie on YouTube, what can Congress do to stop all the crises, immigration, attacking lawmakers? All this is terrified, and it's worried it's going to get worse. I mean, Gary, I got to tell you, I worry too. I wish every senator, I wish every American could have seen my friend Alex Padilla stand up on the floor of the Senate today and call out what happened to him when he tried to ask a question at a press conference by a cabinet official named Kristi Noem, who frankly should resign, is not competent to do the job of Director of Homeland Security. When he went in, fully identified, and they still arrested him, or didn't arrest him, but wrestled him to the ground, handcuffed him. And as Alex said today, if that's what's happening when the cameras are on to a United States senator, what do you think it's happening to immigrant communities elsewhere? I know one of the things I'm working really hard in my state is how do I link, particularly our Hispanic churches, with other houses of worship, so there's kind of a tag team, so that God forbid ICE shows up, you know who to call our congressman, call your local representative, but also have other people of faith show up. What we can do is, it's like the bill, the big ugly bill, the big cruel bill. We don't have to change every Republican senator's minds. We just need to have 4 Republican senators stand up on this awful bill, on this gross mistreatment of immigrants. I think there's nothing inconsistent when you can say, well, you want a secure border, but you don't want people moms being grabbed, picking up their kids from school, or folks going to worship, or folks going to work being grabbed, and Lord knows what happens to them. We only need to convince 4 in the Senate to find their courage. I mean, I do a lot on the Intelligence Committee, where we've seen the politicization of our intelligence community. I continue to hear from my Republican colleagues that I've worked with, because I raise hell with them, particularly in closed hearings. And they keep saying, Mark, you got to keep talking about this. Keep talking about this. I even had one say, Mark, it's like your conscience. You are our conscience. I don't want to be your damn conscience. what we need to do is what you can do, Carrie, and everybody who's viewing this, not hit us, but also, frankly, even if you're in a state where, well, my local congressman's not going to respond, or your senator, get to Republican local elected officials, your city council members, your school board members, your state legislators. These Republicans have got to understand that we are going to remember. And in many communities, particularly rural communities, they're going to take the brunt of these healthcare cuts. They're going to have the rural hospital shut down. The first two places we're going to see in rural America where we lose services are the ability to deliver babies, OBGYN, and mental health services. Is that really going to be better for our country? And again, on a bill that adds $2.5 trillion to the debt, it makes no frickin' sense. All right, Grace from YouTube asked, what is the status of the DREAM Act and any negotiations for immigration reform this year? Listen, the DREAM Act for many years was the lowest hanging fruit. I mean, who would want really to take a kid who was brought here 20 years ago, in many cases, before they even went to school, they grew up in this country, and the DREAM Act says these young people ought to have a right to stay. Even if you want to fight over some of the other undocumented, these young people who are adding to our country ought to have a right to stay. Even Trump in his earlier term suggested there might be a pathway for dreamers. I fear now this vileness out of this administration, this effort to try to shift Americans' attention away from this awful bill or from Trump's breakup with his bro Elon Musk, has taken in many ways, his focus on immigration, or his, I think, illegal calling up in the National Guard in California against the governor's wishes. I was governor of Virginia. I tell you, I would have been pissed off if somebody would have put the National Guard in my state without my approval as governor. In many ways, the Trump administration is using the touchstone of immigration to try to divert us from the very real damage, long-term damage that will be done if this big, awful bill that takes 16 million Americans' health care away, that takes about 4 million Americans' food assistance away, that literally even cuts food banks. Food banks are not going to close the debt, and at the same time adding $2.5 trillion to the debt. It's an abomination, maybe the worst bill ever. And in many ways, what Trump's doing by focusing on immigration is trying to take people's eyes off. So in terms of short term, the ability for immigration reform and for giving dreamers that security they deserve, I'm not super optimistic. But again, it doesn't take a lot. It would just take 4 or 5 other Republicans to find their courage and backbone. Now I've got Vicky on Blue Sky. Do you think Medicare and the Medicaid portion of this ridiculous bill will get much worse or better if it gets out of the House? Or it goes back to the House. First of all, we are absolutely committed to killing this bill in the Senate. We got to do everything we can. And this bill, in many ways, it's tweaked here or there, but in so many ways, it's actually gotten worse. Some of the ways that, for example, we pay for long-term care, for nursing home care, that has actually gotten worse in the new Senate bill than the House. So we need to keep the fight going here in the Senate. I would say so far, just to be accurate, they have not hit Medicare, thank goodness, the way they could. The vast majority of the hits are towards Medicaid. Again, 16 million Americans will lose their health care coverage. And part of that is people directly with Medicaid. Part of that is also with people who are buying their health insurance through what's called the marketplace, these independent markets that Obamacare set up. And if you're thinking, well, gosh, that's bad for those folks, but luckily I buy my health insurance, through my employer, not through the marketplace, don't think you're getting off the hook either. If you destroy the marketplace, the millions of Americans who buy their health insurance through that effort that was set up by Obamacare, that means rates are going to go up for everybody in the healthcare system. The truth is, it's cheaper and more efficient and obviously more humane if you provide people healthcare coverage rather than showing allowing people to even get sicker and then show up at the emergency room, and those costs get simply passed on. The state bears the burden. And again, folks who've got regular health insurance. So let's keep the battle right here on this awful bill in the Senate. The good news is the more Americans hear about this bill, whether it's the healthcare issues or whether it's tax cuts for the wealthy, whether it's cutting off food assistance, whether it's adding to the debt, if we all can talk about it, if you all can repost this information, this is a bill that stinks to high heaven, and the more Americans hear about it, the more they're going to dislike it, and then the more there's a chance that my Republican colleagues will actually find some backbone and courage, because I think the majority of them know this is awful. We just got to give them the nudge and the push to do what's right. Let me now take a question from Wyatt from TikTok. Is there something in this bill that's personally concerned about that folks aren't talking about? I know the threat to Medicaid is bad, but there's so much more we need to watch out for. One of the things, Wyatt, I mentioned, and I say this as a former governor, there's a bunch of tricky stuff in the fine print in this bill, like on food assistance, which again is school breakfast, school lunches. This bill also, and that's a program that is shared state and locality, the administrative costs for our food programs is pretty high. This bill sneakily shifts that burden, that split from the federal government to 75% to the states. That means in a state like mine, $300 million more the state's gonna have to find to just cover the administrative costs. Nobody's talking about that. The fact that this bill builds on some of the cuts to food banks. I mean, what is just cruel? You're gonna throw somebody off of health care. You're gonna provide, cuts to food assistance. You're gonna do this to give the wealthiest a tax break. And then adding $2.5 trillion to the debt that'll push this debt from 37 trillion to close to 40 trillion, and that is a problem. We are basically leaving that for our kids to pay for. Then with that kind of debt and deficit going up, this bill also cuts food bank assistance. I think we all saw, I don't know about Wyatt, where you live, but in COVID, I spent a lot of time and effort trying to get additional resources to our food banks. And in many parts of my state, we've got a third of our community over the last couple of years have had to go to the local food bank. It's freaking outrageous that they would cut food banks. But this big cruel bill, that's why I call it the cruel bill. I know we need to all agree on what the title ought to be, whether it's awful, bad, cruel. But the main thing we need to all do is keep getting this word out. But Wyatt, the one thing that is this, some of these cost shifts that are frankly shifting a lot of the cost of programs to the states. I mentioned food assistance, $300 million to Virginia's state government. I don't know where you live, but I can imagine it's hundreds of millions in your state as well. That's just plain wrong, sneaky. This kind of activity, if I was a business guy, if this was in the business world, you wouldn't last very long, because this is phony accounting on steroids. Listen, I hope everybody will keep dropping questions in the chat. It's really important. And it's also really important that if you see something that resonates with you from me or Corey, in about 10 minutes, you're going to hear from a great leader in the Senate, Raphael Warnock, senator from Georgia, who frankly, as a pastor, he can speak with a fervor and moral suasion that I think everybody in the Senate is envious of. But what I just simply ask you is what we need everyone who is following us. If something resonates, please repost. If it doesn't, please post as well, just to your friends in your own words. The truth is, particularly on this god-awful bill, the more Americans know, the more we're going to have a chance to kill it. The more we're going to have a chance to convince, we don't have to convince everybody, for 4 or 5 Republicans to find the morality and backbone to say no. So we're going to take a quick 10-minute break. And when we come back, we'll be back for more questions, and we'll be my good friend, the senator from Georgia, Senator Warnock. Thanks.
Well, hello, everybody. Senator Warnock here. Great to be a part of this conversation. I've got a question here from that dude 36 on X. I got to take a moment to say I love that handle, that dude. That's a great handle. He's got a great question. The protests were amazing, but what is the next step we can expect from our elected officials to handle these unpredictable times? So let me start with just the first part of that question or the observation. The protests were amazing. Certainly they were that. This past weekend, I was moving around quite a bit. And although I'm the senator from the state of Georgia, as it turns out, I was in Wisconsin for part of the weekend. And I attended a No Kings in America rally in Madison, Wisconsin. And it was very inspiring to see the massive pouring out of protests and people raising their voices in this critical time. And as I saw those protests, I thought about a story that Andy Young told me. Andrew Young was, of course, one of the lieutenants to Dr. King during the days of the Civil Rights Movement. And he tells this story that I actually told at the protest, and I want you to think about it. He said that when they passed the Civil Rights Law of 1964, Dr. King and those who worked with Dr. King went to the White House to have a visit with the president. And they said to the president, Dr. King said to the president, we're glad that we were able to get the Civil Rights Law passed. But Mr. President, Dr. King said, I need a voting rights law. There are too many of my people in the South who cannot vote 100 years after the 13th, 14th, 15th Amendments were passed. The reality is people are disenfranchised in the South, and we need a voting rights law. And LBJ responded by saying, Dr. King, you're right. I understand what you're saying, but you've got to understand that I can't get that done right now. There's no way I can get that done. We just passed the civil rights law, and it took a lot to get that over the finish line. I don't have the power to do it. I just don't have the power. And when they left the meeting, the staff was feeling pretty demoralized and dejected. And they said, Dr. King, what are we going to do now? The president says he does not have the power. And Dr. King sort of shrugged his shoulders and said, well, if the president doesn't have the power, guess what? We're going to have to go and get the president some power. Think about that. A Baptist preacher, an ordinary citizen, saying, I guess we're going to have to go and get our elected official, in this case, the president, some power. And so these protests are so important because we are engaged in the fight right here in this building where I work. So when you ask what are we going to be doing next, I'm going to be fighting against this reconciliation bill. I'm going to be fighting for Medicaid, not only for those folks who are on Medicaid, but because this will impact everybody's health care. But even as I engage these fights on the inside, I need you to keep raising your voices on the outside. You give us power when you stand up and you create the context for the change that we need to see in the world. So Marcia from TikTok says, Reverend Warnock, a lot of us out here are in need of some encouragement and hope. How do you suggest we stay hopeful during these dark times? Well, let me answer that question by continuing on the story that I was just telling. Dr. King said, well, we're going to have to go and get the president some power. And as a result of that, they went to Selma. So when you see John Lewis crossing that Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma, it is the answer to LBJ's question. Who's gonna, how am I gonna get this done? Selma is the work of everyday people, activists, creating the context for change. Well, as it turns out, I was John Lewis's pastor. And I think often of the fact that John Lewis, as he was crossing that bridge, he had no reason to believe that he could win. when he and Hosea Williams, if you've seen the footage, with nothing but trench coats and a backpack, were crossing that Edmund Pettus Bridge with brute force, empowered by the state to visit violence upon them, was on the other side of that bridge. They had no reason to believe that they could win. And yet they kept crossing that bridge. The likelihood of their winning was not great. I think we look back at those times and we act as if their victories were inevitable. They were actually quite unlikely. But he kept pushing, and he crossed that bridge, and as a result of him crossing that bridge, he built the bridge. And people like me crossed over it, sitting now as the first African-American senator from the state of Georgia, working alongside John Ossoff, the first Jewish senator. So much change as a result of that work. And so in my darkest moments when I feel like giving up, I say to myself, who am I to give up? When people like John Lewis and so many others kept the faith, also during dark and difficult days. Change is slow, it comes in starts and fits, but it does come. So take the long view even as you fight with the fierce urgency of now. And know that while the moral arc of the universe is long, Dr. King used to say it bends toward justice. And every day when we show up, we keep bending that arc. Should I go on? So Melissa on YouTube says, I was born with a complex disability, and I rely on programs like SSDI, Medicare, Medicaid, and food stamps just to get by. I'm confused on where this bill is at now. Is it now back on the Democrats in the House to protect these programs? So the short answer to your question is yes. We are the ones who have to try to hold the line and try to protect our people, the American people, from the awful provisions in this bill. Let me be really clear and very honest with you about how this works now. This legislation is being passed, or the effort to pass it is going through a process called reconciliation. And that's when one party has a trifecta. So the Republicans have the White House, they have the Senate majority, and they have the majority in the House. As a result of that, they don't need any of our votes to pass this reconciliation bill. This will be a party line vote. If every Democrat votes against it, and I pray, trust, and hope that we will, if every single Democrat votes against these bills in the House and the Senate, they can still pass their bill, the same way we passed our reconciliation bill. In our case, we were giving people health care. They're trying to take people's health care away and give billionaires a tax cut. So here's the work that we're doing. We are creating the public pressure that is necessary, particularly for Republicans who are in swing districts, who are in battleground states. We're trying to make sure that the public is aware of this bill, the fact that they literally are trying to cut $800 billion out of Medicaid, that they could cut healthcare for as many as 16 million people, that as a result of this bad bill, healthcare, the cost of healthcare, the cost of insurance, even if you're on private insurance, you kick that many people off of Medicaid, everybody's healthcare premiums are in fact about to go up. Not only because of that, but because the bill does not extend the tax credits that keep the cost of healthcare lower for all of us. They're doing, in fact, what they were doing in 2017. They're trying to defund the Affordable Care Act, also known as Obamacare. In addition to that, yes, severe cuts on SNAP, all of this. And so, Melissa, thank you for sharing your story. Here's what I need you to do. Tell your story. Put it on a video. Post it. Get the word out. And then others who see your story will repost it. And we will continue to get the word out, create the public pressure that is necessary to get a better result. Thank you for your question. Pete on YouTube says, what practically does fighting look like? Look, Pete, it can take many forms. We certainly saw it this weekend. What an inspiring outpouring again of our humanity this weekend, all across our country. Red, yellow, brown, black, and white, young and old, rich and poor, people of various perspectives and persuasions showing up and saying, we believe in democracy. We are an American people. And we're not going to give in to the forces that seek to divide us, even as a president has tanks rolling through the Capitol on his birthday. And even as he dispatches troops to an American city and threatens to do it all across the country. Think about that, the iconography and the pictures of our service members whom he clearly does not respect, using them as pawns. And I think as he puts them on the streets, part of the message he's trying to send is that somehow we're at war with one another. No, we're not at war with one another. We're at war against these cuts in healthcare. We're at war against those who would literally take, or against the ideas of taking food out of the mouths of hungry children in order to give billionaires a tax cut. That's what we're fighting against. And we all do that in our own way. I get to do it in the United States Senate, but when you raise your voice in your neighborhood, in your community, when you share the facts with people that you know and trust, that's what fighting looks like. And can I tell you something else? Joy in a difficult time, joy, particularly if you're a marginalized person, is its own act of resistance. And so even as you fight, know that there were others who were fighting this fight long before you. And one day each of us is going to have to pass that fight on to somebody else. And so even in the midst of the struggle, may you lean into your family, your loved ones, the people who really care about you, and may you be a joyful warrior. Joy in a difficult time is its own act of resistance. Take care, everybody. Good to chat with you. Keep the faith. Keep looking up. Make sure to keep dropping questions, by the way, in the chat. Looks like your next senator is my colleague from the great state of Connecticut, Senator Blumenthal, who's been in his share of fights and who is indeed a joyful warrior, is coming to answer more questions. Take care, everybody.
A joyful warrior indeed. Good to be with you, and wonderful to follow my great friend, Reverend Warnock, also Senator Warnock, and a great leader in our caucus. I have the next question from Laura on YouTube. Why are bills bloated with a bunch of fluff? I don't understand why a lot of the things in this budget bill belong in a budget bill. Well, Laura, you've asked a question that actually bedevils me. Every year we do a budget. And let me give you what you may regard as an inadequate answer. I'm not sure I have an adequate answer because it involves the legislative process, which often is fraught. And one reason is that the fluff, in my view or your view, may be another person's essential provisions, such as so-called earmarks or the congressionally directed spending, which enables senators and members of Congress to bring home projects to fund them that are very important to them. You know the old saying, all politics is local. Well, a lot of budgeting is local too, if it funds a new healthcare center or repair of a bridge or stuff that makes a real difference and is visible and we can point to as things we've done. And the alternative is for all of the power to go to the executive branch, which may not have as much knowledge, and also, frankly, in this administration, may have no knowledge and no idea of what it's doing locally. Now, fluff might also be, let's say, dealing with the kinds of deductions for childcare expenses, funding the childcare credit. If you don't have children, why do you care? It's fluff, right? Well, it's pretty essential to make sure that people can provide what their children need. And the kinds of measures dealing with children have lifted countless kids out of poverty. But again, it may seem like fluff to, let's say, a single person who is very young or a senior person who is older. So fluff often enables us to meet key needs in a way that some people may not appreciate, but there's no question that there is fluff, that is to say, unnecessary spending in budgets. In the defense budget, for example, I've long advocated eliminating some of the wasteful procurement programs that we still have. Next question is Janice from TikTok. I know we're supposed to be asking about the budget, but did I see you bring a book into the live stream? Also, do you have a book you're reading now that you recommend? How did you observe that I brought a book into the live stream? You are very, very insightful and observant. I am a history, I won't say buff, I'm a history lover. I'm reading a book right now called Freedom from Fear, and it's by a professor at Yale named David Kennedy. It happens to be a Pulitzer Prize-winning book. It's about, as you might guess, freedom from fear comes from Franklin Roosevelt. So it's about the period of the New Deal through the war, the World War II. And that's about where I am in the book right now. So I don't know how far it goes into his administration. I recommend it highly. It's very instructive in a number of ways. First of all, in the importance of public service, which is so demeaned these days by this administration. Second, we're talking about budgeting, not unrelated to budget, because as you remember, the New Deal really, and here is a very important observation. The New Deal didn't eliminate the Depression. A lot of people think New Deal successfully fought the Depression. It was really the war that put people back to work, but the New Deal gave people hope and security, hence freedom from fear. And we are going back to that insecurity and the fear. I see it every day around the country as a result of this administration. Third point I'd make, which was brought home to me, Franklin Roosevelt had a lot of difficulty persuading the American people that we should be in the war. There was a strong isolationist, America First streak of opinion among many reputable quarters. You know, Lindbergh and other commentators very much in favor of America First. What do we see right now in the Republican MAGA movement? America First, ignoring our responsibilities to stop Putin in Ukraine. As you can see, I hope you can see from my lapel, I have been a strong supporter of Ukraine. I just came back from my 7th trip, but I recognize in this book's account that Franklin Roosevelt actually never persuaded the American people. It was the Japanese who did it in Pearl Harbor. And then Hitler declaring war on the United States, which forced America's hand and gave Franklin Roosevelt the opportunity to do what he knew eventually we would have to do. And it was the right thing to do, to side with Britain and France and our other allies, which now, again, are allies we have a responsibility to support. Next question is John on YouTube. Speaking of history, Trump's corruption is historic. Do you have insight into what your colleagues thinking? Is there actually a chance we can turn this around and convince some to change their votes? Absolutely. Another important question. These questions are great. Thank you. insight into what my colleagues are thinking. I assume you mean my Republican colleagues. I can tell you about my Democratic colleagues. They are absolutely aghast. All of us are appalled. This historic corruption is really degrading our democracy in a fundamental way. And I know you get it because you're asking the question. My Republican colleagues are not thinking. They are not thinking about it. They are in denial. They don't want to think about it. And they are ducking a historic responsibility. I've talked to many of them. I think we have to convince them that they have a responsibility here. Donald Trump is making hundreds of millions of dollars. You know, when I say hundreds of millions of dollars, I mean hundreds of millions of dollars. And by the time we are done in this administration, he will have made billions of dollars taking advantage of his presidency, exploiting it. For example, on the crypto stuff, he is receiving hundreds of millions of dollars from transaction fees on his stable coin and his meme coins, the transaction fees alone when people buy and sell it. So I could go down the list of emoluments, in other words, benefits from foreign countries where he's failed to come to Congress for approval, the crypto stuff, the real estate, the plane from Qatar, the financing from UAE, the hotels that he's placing in countries where he's receiving benefits. You're right, the corruption is historic, and I will not be silent, but I also will not lose hope that we can change some of those votes. Robert on YouTube, thank you. Senator, can you explain what bird baths are? What does that mean for this bill? Another great question. Well, bird bath involves a review, and it is not spelled B-I-R-D, it's B-Y-R-D, named after Robert Byrd, then Majority Leader, who said that reconciliation bills, this is the rule, his name was Robert too, means that provisions can be done by majority vote, they don't require 60 vote majority, if they relate to taxing and spending, fiscal matters, reconciliation. What does that mean for this bill? It means that the parliamentarian gives provisions a bird bath, a review, based on that criteria. For example, a measure that says that courts must require a bond to be posted in order to issue a contempt citation when one of the parties disobeys a court order. That doesn't seem to relate to taxing or spending. And so we will challenge it in a bird bath and try to get it out of the bill in that way, because courts should be able to enforce their orders without the parties posting a bond. As you can tell, I'm talking a little bit like a lawyer. I'm a trial lawyer. I was a prosecutor for most of my career. When parties don't obey court orders, they are cited for contempt. If the parties have to post a bond before the court can act to enforce its order, that undermines the authority of the court. None of this involves federal spending or taxing, therefore it ought to be out. Similarly, there's a provision in the bill that says states are preempted from passing their own AI regulation. That has nothing to do with federal taxing or spending. It's misguided. States ought to be free to protect their citizens against deep fakes and impersonations and other kinds of bad things AI can do. Of course, AI does a lot of great things in the medical area. It can do research, it can do diagnosis, but there are also pitfalls, and states should have the ability without federal preemption. We hope the bird bath will enable us to take that provision out of the reconciliation bill. Well, that ends my conversation with you. I've really enjoyed it. These are great questions. We're going to take a 2-minute break, I think. Looks like we're taking a 2-minute break. And then your next senator, I want to hear a drum roll, my colleague, Senator Chuck Schumer, will be here to answer more questions. And please make sure to keep dropping questions in the chats. This is a great conversation. I'm so proud to be with you. I'm proud to be a member of this caucus. You've heard from a number of us in this conversation. Some of you have been in other conversations. And I'm going to continue fighting. This is an important moment to fight. Historic corruption, dumb and cruel policies from this administration. We have to stand up and speak out. And the rallies across the country, I went to a number in Connecticut, just as I did weeks before, have given me such heart and energy and inspiration. So all of you who are coming to these rallies, please keep up the great work. Anyone who hasn't been, please attend, because it will inspire you to do more and it will give you hope. You know, the emotion, or one of the emotions that's most important in life, is hope. And we have to have hope as well as outrage, and never give up. As Winston Churchill said, never give up, never give up, never give up. Thank you all.
Hey, greetings, everyone. I'm glad to be here as we kind of wrap up the evening. I just came from the floor where I was giving a speech on reconciliation, and specifically on an aspect of reconciliation that most folks haven't focused on. And that is the Republican bill does two things that no reconciliation bill has ever done before. One is it creates deficits beyond a 10-year window. So the deficits keep piling up for 30 years to come. 30 years out is the longest that the Congressional Budget Office is willing to estimate. And the second is it creates a phony baseline to evaluate the cost of the bill so that we're pretending it costs a lot less than it's actually costing. And this is just an obliteration of fiscal responsibility. Back in 1974, the Senate and House got together, both sides of the aisle, and said, we're going to be honest about what measures cost. Well, this is the end of that 51 years of investment in honesty. And instead, this new baseline will say, oh, no, look, it doesn't cost nearly as much as people are saying when it actually does. So I was out on the floor saying that's just wrong. Let's not do this. Let's not create this dishonesty. We had smoke in the mirrors in the past. It got us into a lot of trouble. Let's not do it now. And now I get to turn to your all's questions. And the first one is from Holly on YouTube, a budget question. How great is the chance the tax cuts are going to increase the deficit enough to result in an across-the-board cut? Well, this is a reference to a measure in the law where if the deficit gets to a certain size, it then has to have a corresponding cut to programs to reduce the amount of the deficit. But here's the reality. That measure is going to be waived because we've seen it happen again and again. Each time the Republicans do one of these massive tax cut bills and run up a massive deficit, they then put another measure forward on some must-pass bill to wipe out the balancing across the board cuts. But Holly, let me expand a little bit on your question and just remind people, the amount of the deficits are going to be massive. What's well over $3 trillion over a 10-year period. And the Republicans said, well, maybe the tax cuts will stimulate the economy enough to offset some of that because greater economy will produce more taxable income, produce more revenue. So that analysis has now been done. And the answer is no. Actually, the deficits are going to increase interest rates, which will affect the economy negatively. And so I was really struck that this kind of analysis, dynamic analysis, says it will actually, when you take the dynamism into account of the impact on the economy, it actually results in an even higher debt. So a debt of approximately 3 to 3.5 trillion over 10 years and about 32 trillion over 30 years. Massive, and that's on top of what we would run up in deficit and debts just under current law. And now we have a question from Ali on X. When will the Senate vote on the big, beautiful, or should I say ugly budget bill? And we have different names for it. Sometimes we call it the big, beautiful betrayal because Trump ran on helping working families. But what this bill does is help billionaires. It's families lose and billionaires win. And to give you some sense of that, for those who are struggling in the economy, less affluent, what was referred to the bottom 20%, well, they get a value from the taxation measures of the bill of about $90 a year. $90 a year. So less than $2 a week, not even a cup of coffee. Don't spend it all in one place. But if you're already doing very well and you have $1 million income per year, you get not $90 of benefit, but $90,000 of benefit. So those who don't need it get 1,000 times more than the people who do need it. I say that is just evil. That's wrong. That is ugly, Ali, using the term that you put forward. This is an ugly, ugly bill. When will we vote on it? Here's the planned schedule. What the Senate leadership is trying to do is hold all of the examination of the Senate version of the bill, because the Senate, not in public, but in private, the Republicans have been rewriting the House bills and slowly putting forward the language. Those rewritten bills are being put through what we call the bird bath to remove things that are primarily about policy that aren't supposed to be in a reconciliation bill. They're hoping to complete that by Monday, move to the bill on Tuesday, spend 50 hours of debate on the bill, and then there would be a vote-a-rama, which will probably extend, into the morning hours, where we'll be putting forward amendments and voting on them. And so final vote on passing the bill comes at the end of the vote-a-rama. So if I was kind of guessing where to put your bet on this, well, maybe sometime, maybe 6 a.m. Friday morning after we've gone all night, but maybe longer. But that's a guess. Now, that bill that they pass won't be the final bill. That will be a bill that will lead to negotiations between the House Republicans and the Senate Republicans about the differences between their two bills. They will probably, again, not do this in public. They'll do it in a closed room, back hall. They don't want the public to see this. And then they'll reach agreement and bring the same bill back to both chambers for a final vote. So that will happen after the July 4th recess. And by the way, it's not this Friday I'm speaking of. So we're going to go through this week and through this weekend on through next Monday with the bird bath over policy, then the 50 hours. So we're talking a week after this coming Friday. And now it looks like we have a question coming through video submission. Let's take a look.
My son's on Medicaid, and I'm obviously worried that Trump's cuts to healthcare are going to affect our access to his healthcare. And I've noticed that appealing to Republicans' sense of humanity on this issue has been an absolutely fruitless endeavor. So I'm wondering, what's your plan to convince 4 of your Republican colleagues to vote against this floating dumpster fire budget bill?
So I gather you all just saw the video, right, folks? Okay, so you saw the same video I just saw on a laptop, and the individual saying his son's dependent upon Medicaid. In every state it has a different name. In Oregon, it's the Oregon Health Plan. How are we going to convince 4 of our Republican colleagues to actually say, no, that's unacceptable? And it really is just so stark that 16 million people will lose health care. And those are folks on Medicaid who are not the most affluent folks in our country, but it's also people on disabilities. It's also veterans. It's also seniors who are in long-term care. And by the way, it doesn't just affect those 16 million people who lose health care, but because the revenues drop, it means a lot of rural clinics and rural hospitals will go out of business, affecting entire rural communities. So how do we convince 4 of our colleagues not to do this? Well, here is what the Republicans have been up to. They've decided to frame what they're doing as basically saying you have to work in order to get Medicaid. And on first kind of response, that resonates pretty well with the public. Okay, yeah, you have to work. All right, if you're able to work, you should be working. That's the idea. I disagree with that idea completely. I think health care should be a basic right. We shouldn't have all these cracks in our system between different types of health care. We should have universal health care. I'm a big proponent of universal health care. But unfortunately, they're going to frame it that way. Well, listen, what they're really doing is they're putting up so much red tape that people who are struggling won't be able to continuously kind of stay on the plan because they have to reapply every few months. In some cases, they may have to provide documents every single month. So envision the mother with 2 kids and 2 jobs trying to keep getting fired from either one of them while the schedule changes every single week. And somehow she's supposed to give these monthly updates or every 6 months reapply in order to keep health care in place. Well, the reality is when you wrap the entry gate in red tape, it makes it very hard for people to go through that gate. Why do we have a party, the Republican Party, which is always talking about reducing red tape and bureaucracy, but when it comes to struggling families, is just wrapping them in that red tape so they can't even keep health care. It's evil. So the answer to your question is the way we're trying to get 4 Republicans to say this is wrong, not only because a huge number of your constituents will lose health care, and as a result, people will die because without health care insurance, they don't get their meds, or they cut their meds in half. They don't go and get the lump checked that turns into a lethal cancer because it wasn't caught early. And the estimate is 50,000 more people will die a year in the United States of America because of this Republican plan. I mean, that's really where the rubber hits the road. People will die. And so we're saying to our Republican colleagues, look, you are champions for rural America. And this is going to really hurt the revenue for rural clinics and hospitals. There's an estimate how many thousands of them will go out of business. That's an argument that seems to cut through more than talking about the number of people who will lose health care. Like you said, the carnage of people losing health care just isn't moving the hearts of our Republican colleagues. I'm not optimistic that we're going to find those 4 people, but we sure are trying to say, here's the honest facts, and encouraging Americans to weigh in, because it's the residents, the constituents of those Republican colleagues weighing in, which is going to turn the hearts of my Republican colleagues. Not the arguments we make on the floor of the Senate, but the constituents from their states saying, what are you doing to me? What you're doing is devastating. So we have a last question. Ashley on YouTube. Senator Merkley, I have 2 questions. Are you the guy who posts the DC hawk videos? And if yes, maybe you can understand my concern for the 250 million acres of our public land that is for sale and part of this bill. What exactly does that mean? And is there a potential for this part to be removed? So yes, I'm the one who posts the red-tailed hawk videos. For 3 years, I've been tracking the establishment of this nest in a tree that is between the Senate office building and the Capitol. So I walk past this tree many times a day. I saw some birds attacking a hawk, and which led me to observe that they were building a nest. By the way, the hawk was in the top of the Hatfield peace tree, and the nest is in an adjoining ginkgo tree. It's about 85 feet off the ground. I was trying to get a camera installed, but the biggest lift would only go to 70 feet that we have here at the Capitol, so we couldn't get you a hawk cam. They come the 3rd week of April, they leave the 1st week of June. They are now gone, and I did get a last little video of the baby flying off, the little fledgling flying off, so hopefully that'll be posted soon. And to your point, yes, thank you for your concern about the sale of our public land. This is your land. This is our land. This is Americans' land. To sell it off to billionaires. I mean, who has the money to buy 250 million acres? Hedge funds, are they going to buy it? Elon Musk, is he going to buy it? It's going to be incredibly rich people that grab hold of our public land and take it away from us. This is absolutely awful. I mean, I grew up seeing the forest as my escape, where I could find freedom, find spiritual nourishment. Any moment I could get, I was hiking and camping in the forests of Oregon. And I know that people across our country have similar experiences. And we do not want our land sold off to Elon Musk. So I'll do everything I can to convince my colleagues that this is wrong, but they're responding to the rich. I mean, this is a bill for billionaires, and billionaires are the ones who have the money to buy this land, and they want it. It's just wrong. But again, please, constituents, weigh in with your senators and say this has to come out. I am going to try to get it out in the birdbath, saying this is a policy change that doesn't fit into a reconciliation bill. It's a major policy change. But that's up to the parliamentarian to rule on that. They're going to weigh, the parliamentarians will weigh the budget impact of the money that comes from the sale against the policy. And the last time we had something like this in terms of it was drilling in the Arctic refuge. And we said, major policy change, it shouldn't be in this bill. And the Republicans said, major revenue, and they won. But I'm hoping this time we win. But if we don't win with the parliamentarian, we need to win the amendment we'll put up to strike this provision. And that means we need you all engaging with your Republican senators to tell them to get their act together and honor the people of the United States. Do not sell off our lands. We are in this together. Please keep using your voices off the couch. Hold your electeds accountable. Join an affinity group, because to be angry and alone is to be depressed, but be angry, organized with others, is to be energized and effective. And that's the type of energy that can stop this bill.